The wine splashed into the crystal glass, dark as blood in the candlelight. Eleanor's hand trembled only slightly as she poured. She had learned to hide the shaking months ago when the beatings started. Her stepmother watched from across the dining room, eyes sharp as a hawk hunting mice. One wrong move and there would be bruises tomorrow where no one could see them. Eleanor finished pouring and stepped back, head bowed, hands folded. The Duke of Ashworth did not look at her. He never looked at her. She was just another servant in his vast, empty house, though once she had been the daughter of his late wife's dearest friend. That felt like a lifetime ago now. Eleanor moved along the table, pouring wine for each guest. Her stepmother had dressed her in the oldest servant's uniform, grey and shapeless, 2 sizes too large. It hung on Eleanor's thin frame like a sack. Her blonde hair was scraped back so tightly it gave her headaches. Her stepmother said it was fitting. Eleanor was 23, far too old to marry, too plain to attract any man's notice, and lucky to have a roof over her head at all. The guests barely glanced at her as she served them. To them she was invisible, a shadow moving between the chairs. Only the Duke seemed aware of her presence, though he never raised his eyes. His jaw tightened slightly each time she approached his chair. Eleanor wondered if her clumsiness annoyed him. She tried to pour more carefully. The dinner party dragged on for hours. Eleanor's feet ached in her worn shoes. Her stomach growled quietly, though she had learned to ignore hunger too. The servants would eat the scraps later if there were any. Her stepmother would make sure Eleanor got the smallest portion. That was how it had been for 5 years, ever since Eleanor's father died and left her penniless. Her stepmother had taken the inheritance, sold their home, and attached herself to distant relatives who needed servants. Eleanor had become the lowest of the low. She fetched and carried. She scrubbed floors. She served wine to people who once called her an equal, and she endured it because she had nowhere else to go. Eleanor had once been happy. She remembered her childhood dimly, like a dream that fades upon waking. Her mother had died when she was small, but her father had been kind. He told her stories and called her his little songbird because she hummed while she worked in the garden. He had promised she would marry well and be happy. Then he caught a fever and died within a week, and everything changed. Her stepmother's true nature emerged the moment the funeral ended. The hitting started that first night. The cruel words followed. Eleanor learned quickly that fighting back only made things worse. She learned to be quiet and small and invisible, but inside, in the secret places of her heart, Eleanor had not broken. She still remembered kindness. She still helped the other servants when she could, sharing her food, mending their clothes, telling them stories to make them smile. She still found beauty in small things, a sunrise through the kitchen window, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of birds singing in the garden. Her stepmother could take everything else, but she could not take these tiny joys. Eleanor held on to them like treasures, like proof that the world was not entirely cruel. She told herself that someday things might change. She did not know how or when, but she had to believe it or she would have nothing left to keep her going. The Duke of Ashworth sat at the head of his table and felt nothing. He had not felt much of anything in the 3 years since his wife died. The guests chatted around him, talking about the weather and the latest society gossip, and their voices washed over him like meaningless noise. He nodded at appropriate moments and said appropriate things, but inside he was empty. His great house felt like a tomb. His title felt like a burden. His life stretched ahead of him, endless and grey, and he could not bring himself to care about any of it. He was only 30, but he felt ancient. Once Alexander Blackwood had been different. Once he had laughed and loved and believed in happiness. Then Maria had caught the same fever that swept through London that terrible winter. She died in his arms, and something in him died with her. Everyone said he should remarry. His mother pestered him constantly about heirs and duty. Society whispered that 3 years was long enough to mourn. But Alexander could not imagine loving anyone else. He could not imagine wanting to try, so he went through the motions of living, hosting dinners he did not enjoy, attending events that bored him, managing his estates with mechanical efficiency. He was a hollow man wearing a duke's clothes. Tonight felt like every other night, tedious and interminable. Alexander reached for his wine glass and caught a faint scent that made him pause. Lavender and something else, something warm and sweet he could not name. It was gone in an instant, but it had been there. He frowned slightly. His senses had been dull for so long that any sensation felt strange. He took a sip of wine and tried to focus on what Lord Hampton was saying about hunting. The scent came again, stronger this time. Alexander's eyes moved without his conscious thought, tracking the source. The servant girl stood beside him, refilling his glass. He had seen her before at these dinners, but never really looked at her. Now he noticed the graceful way her hands moved, despite their shaking. He noticed the delicate curve of her neck. He noticed the lavender scent that clung to her, mixed with something that was purely her. She finished pouring and stepped back, head bowed. Alexander saw a bruise on her wrist, barely visible at the edge of her sleeve. Something stirred in his chest, something that felt almost like anger. He looked away quickly, disturbed by the feeling. It was easier to feel nothing. Feeling meant pain. He had learned that lesson thoroughly. He forced his attention back to his guests and tried to forget the servant girl with the lavender scent. But throughout the rest of the meal he found himself aware of her movements around the room. He found himself breathing deeper when she came near, trying to catch that scent again. It bothered him that he could not stop noticing her. It bothered him more that he wanted to. The dinner finally ended. The guests departed. Alexander retreated to his study with a book he would not read. His butler, Morrison, brought him brandy and stoked the fire. The house settled into nighttime silence. Alexander sat in his leather chair and stared at the flames and felt the familiar emptiness settle over him like a blanket. This was his life now. This was all it would ever be. He had accepted that. He had made peace with it. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, a tiny crack appeared in the wall around his heart. A servant girl with trembling hands and lavender scent had somehow slipped through his defenses without trying. Alexander told himself it meant nothing. He told himself he would forget her by morning. He was wrong. Eleanor stumbled down the servants' stairs, exhausted. The kitchen was dark, except for dying embers in the great fireplace. The other servants had gone to bed. Eleanor's stomach cramped with hunger, but when she checked the scullery, there were no scraps left. Her stepmother must have thrown them out. It was petty and cruel, but Eleanor was used to it. She drank some water from the pump and told herself it would be enough. Tomorrow she would eat. Tomorrow was always her hope when today was too hard. She climbed the narrow stairs to the attic where the lowest servant slept. Her room was barely more than a closet, with a thin mattress on the floor and a single blanket. Eleanor changed into her nightgown, shivering in the cold. She lay down and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Through the tiny window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky. They looked like diamonds, beautiful and untouchable. Eleanor made a wish on them, the way she had as a child. She wished for kindness. She wished for a place to belong. She wished for someone to see her, truly see her, and not look away. It was a foolish wish. She knew that, but in the darkness, alone with her aching body and empty stomach, Eleanor let herself be foolish. She let herself hope, and eventually exhaustion dragged her down into sleep. The Duke could not stop thinking about her. 3 days after the dinner party, He still caught himself remembering the lavender scent, the way her hands shook, the bruise on her wrist. It made no sense. He had seen countless servants in his life and never given them a second thought. Why should this one be different? Alexander tried to dismiss it as simple curiosity, nothing more. But when he learned his mother was hosting another dinner and demanding his presence, his first thought was that he might see the servant girl again. That realization disturbed him. He told himself he was being ridiculous. He told himself to forget about her. He did not succeed. The night of his mother's dinner, Alexander arrived at the London townhouse with a strange, nervous energy he had not felt in years. His mother greeted him with her usual litany of complaints about his unmarried state. The Dowager Duchess had a list of suitable young ladies she wanted him to meet. Alexander nodded and said nothing, knowing resistance was futile. The guests began arriving. He greeted them automatically, his mind elsewhere. Then the servants began bringing in the wine, and there she was. Eleanor had hoped she would not have to serve at this dinner, but her stepmother insisted, and Eleanor had no choice. She entered the dining room with her head down and her heart pounding. The Duke sat at the table, looking as cold and remote as a marble statue. Eleanor told herself he would not remember her. Why would he? She was nothing to him. She picked up the wine bottle with shaking hands and began to pour. When she reached the Duke's chair, that same thing happened as before. He went very still. Eleanor could feel his eyes on her, though she did not dare look up. She poured carefully, desperately trying not to spill a single drop. The lavender scent rose from her skin, the only luxury she allowed herself, made from stolen herbs from the garden, mixed with a bit of soap. It was all she had that was hers. "What is your name?" The Duke's voice was quiet, but in the chatter of the dinner party, Eleanor heard it clearly. She froze. Servants were not supposed to speak unless spoken to, but she had to answer him. "Eleanor, your grace," she whispered. Eleanor Hartley. She risked a glance at his face and immediately wished she had not. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, grey and intense, and they looked at her as if they could see straight through to her soul. No one had looked at her that way in 5 years. No one had looked at her at all. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Then someone called the Duke's name, breaking the moment. Eleanor fled to the other side of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She did not understand what had just happened. She only knew that something had shifted, something huge and terrifying and impossible. Alexander watched Eleanor move around the room, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt alive. It was not desire, not exactly, though he could not deny she was lovely, despite her awful clothes and severe hairstyle. It was something deeper. When he looked at her, the emptiness inside him receded. When he caught her scent, the world seemed to have color again. She made him want to feel things, to be present in his own life instead of sleepwalking through it. He did not understand it. He did not trust it, but he could not deny it either. Alexander found himself doing something he had not done in a very long time. He found himself planning for the future, a future that somehow included a servant girl named Eleanor Hartley. After dinner, Alexander cornered his mother in the drawing room. "The servant who poured the wine," he said without preamble. "Eleanor Hartley. Who is she?" His mother raised an eyebrow. "A servant, Alexander. Why on earth would you ask?" Alexander kept his voice carefully neutral. "I noticed she seemed unwell. I wondered about her circumstances." It was not quite a lie. His mother studied him with sharp eyes. "She is the stepdaughter of Mrs. Cromwell, who serves as my companion. The girl was left penniless and took service. That is all I know, really." "Alexander, why this sudden interest in a servant?" Alexander shrugged. "Simple curiosity." But his mind was already working. A stepdaughter fallen on hard times. The bruises, the fear in her eyes. He had seen enough of the world to guess at what her life must be like. That night, Alexander lay in bed and made a decision that would change everything. He would help Eleanor Hartley. He would remove her from whatever situation caused those bruises and that fear. He told himself it was simple charity, a duke's duty to protect those weaker than himself. He told himself it had nothing to do with lavender scent or the way his heart had started beating again when he looked at her. He told himself many things. None of them were the whole truth. The whole truth was that Eleanor had woken something in him that he thought had died with Maria, and now that it was awake, Alexander could not go back to the emptiness. He did not want to. For the first time in 3 years, the Duke of Ashworth wanted something. He wanted Eleanor Hartley safe, and what a duke wanted, a duke got. Eleanor did not see the Duke again for a week. She almost convinced herself she had imagined the intensity in his eyes, the way he had asked her name, then Morrison. The Duke's butler appeared in the kitchen one morning and requested Eleanor's presence in the Duke's study. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Servants summoned to the master's study were usually being dismissed or punished. Her stepmother would be furious. Eleanor followed Morrison on trembling legs, trying to remember what she might have done wrong. Perhaps she had broken something without noticing. Perhaps someone had complained about her service. By the time she reached the study door, she was shaking so badly she could hardly stand. The Duke stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light. He turned when Morrison announced her. "Leave us," he said quietly. Morrison hesitated, clearly surprised, then bowed and left. Eleanor stood just inside the door, head bowed, hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. The silence stretched out. She could hear her own heart beating. "Miss Hartley," the Duke said finally. "Look at me, please." Eleanor forced her eyes up. The Duke studied her face, and she saw something in his expression that looked almost like pain. "I have a proposition for you," he said. "I need someone to serve as my companion, to pour my evening wine and perhaps read to me sometimes. The position would come with a room in the main house, proper clothing, and a small salary. Would you be interested?" Eleanor stared at him, unable to process the words. A room, clothing, salary. It made no sense. Dukes did not offer such positions to lowly servants. There had to be a catch. There had to be something he wanted in return. Her mind went to dark places, assumptions born of 5 years of cruelty. The Duke seemed to read her thoughts. His jaw tightened. "I want nothing improper," he said firmly. "You would serve me wine and occasionally read aloud. That is all. You have my word as a gentleman." Eleanor wanted to believe him. Oh, how she wanted to believe him. But trust was a luxury she could not afford. "Why me, Your Grace?" she whispered. "Why not one of the other servants?" The Duke was quiet for a long moment. "Because when I am near you," he said slowly, as if the words were being dragged from him, "I do not feel quite so dead inside. I cannot explain it better than that." The raw honesty in his voice broke through Eleanor's defenses. She saw the loneliness in his eyes, the same loneliness that lived in her own heart. He was not trying to trick her. He was simply a man in pain, reaching out to another person in pain. Eleanor did not understand why her presence helped him. She did not understand any of this. But she understood suffering, and she understood the desperate need for something, anything, to make it hurt less. "I accept," she heard herself say. "Thank you, Your Grace." The Duke's shoulders sagged slightly, as if he had been holding his breath. "Thank you, Miss Hartley," he said softly. "Morrison will make the arrangements. You will start tonight." Eleanor left the study in a daze. She could not quite believe what had happened. A room of her own. freedom from her stepmother's cruelty. It was more than she had dared hope for, but as she climbed the stairs to pack her few belongings, a tiny seed of fear planted itself in her heart. The Duke had been honest with her. She believed that, but she had also seen the way he looked at her, the intensity in his grey eyes. She had seen the way he breathed deeper when she came near. He wanted something from her, even if he did not fully realize it yet. Eleanor was not sure she had anything left to give. She had been empty for so long. But perhaps, whispered a small hopeful voice in her mind, perhaps he did not want to take. Perhaps he wanted to give. Perhaps they could save each other. It was a dangerous thought. It was a beautiful thought. Eleanor held it close as she folded her nightgown and prepared to step into a new life. That evening, Eleanor entered the Duke's private sitting room, wearing a simple but well-made dress of deep blue. Morrison had provided it along with a room on the second floor that was larger than any space Eleanor had occupied in 5 years. She had cried when she saw the bed with its thick mattress and clean sheets, the window that looked out on the garden, the small fireplace that would keep her warm. It felt like a dream. She was terrified she would wake up. Now she stood before the Duke, a silver tray in her hands bearing a crystal decanter of wine and a single glass. He sat in a leather chair by the fire, a book open on his lap. When he looked up and saw her, something flickered across his face, something warm and alive. "Miss Hartley," he said, "please, come in." Eleanor approached slowly. Her hands did not shake as badly tonight. She was still nervous, but the terror had faded. The Duke had been true to his word about the room and the dress. Perhaps he would be true to his word about everything else. She poured the wine carefully, grateful when not a single drop spilled. The Duke took the glass, and his fingers brushed hers for just an instant. Eleanor felt that light touch all the way down to her toes. She stepped back quickly, confused by her reaction. "Will you sit?" the Duke asked, gesturing to the chair across from his. "You do not have to stand." Eleanor hesitated. Servants did not sit in the presence of their masters, but the Duke was watching her with those storm-grey eyes, and she found herself unable to refuse. She perched on the edge of the chair, back straight, hands folded in her lap. They sat in silence for several minutes. The Duke sipped his wine slowly. The fire crackled and popped. Eleanor found herself relaxing despite herself. There was something peaceful about this room, about his quiet presence. He did not seem to want anything from her except her company. Finally, the Duke spoke. "Would you tell me about yourself, Miss Hartley, if it does not pain you to speak of it?" Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. Her past was private, a source of shame. But when she looked at the Duke, she saw genuine interest in his face. He truly wanted to know, so Eleanor found herself speaking, haltingly at first. Then with more confidence, she told him about her father, about her childhood, about how everything had fallen apart. She did not tell him about the beatings, but she suspected he guessed. His knuckles went white on his wineglass when she mentioned her stepmother. When Eleanor finished, the Duke was quiet for a long time. "You have been very brave," he said finally. "More brave than you know." Eleanor shook her head. "I did nothing. I simply endured. Endurance is its own form of courage," the Duke replied. "Especially when the world gives you every reason to give up, and yet you do not." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever called her brave before. No one had ever suggested her survival meant something. "Thank you, Your Grace," she whispered. The Duke set down his empty glass. "Will you come again tomorrow night?" he asked. "I find I would like to hear more of your thoughts." Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she left the room, she felt something shift inside her chest. The wall she had built around her heart developed a tiny crack. Through that crack, a thin ray of light began to shine. The nightly ritual began. Every evening after dinner, Eleanor came to the Duke's sitting room. She poured his wine. They talked. Sometimes she read aloud from books of poetry or novels. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence. Slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. The Duke told her about his late wife, about his grief, about the emptiness that had consumed him. Eleanor listened and offered no empty platitudes, only quiet understanding. She knew what it meant to lose everything. The Duke seemed to appreciate that. He talked more freely with her than he had with anyone in 3 years. One evening, about 2 weeks after Eleanor had started her new position, something changed. She was reading aloud from a book of Wordsworth's poetry when she stumbled over a particularly complex passage. She laughed at herself, a sound she had not made in years. The Duke looked at her, and his whole face transformed. "Do that again," he said softly. Eleanor blinked, confused. "Do what, Your Grace?" "Laugh," he said. "Please." I had forgotten what laughter sounded like. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she smiled at him. The Duke smiled back, and Eleanor's breath caught. He was beautiful when he smiled, the coldness melting away to reveal warmth underneath. "You should smile more often, Your Grace," she said without thinking, then immediately regretted her boldness. But the Duke just shook his head. "Only if you will do the same, Eleanor." He had used her given name. No title, no formality, just Eleanor. She should have corrected him. It was not proper, but she did not want to. She liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "As you wish, Your Grace," she said softly. "Alexander," he corrected gently. "When we are alone, please call me Alexander." Eleanor's heart was beating very fast. This was dangerous territory. Servants and masters did not use given names. They did not sit together by fires and share their pain and laugh at poetry. They were crossing lines that should not be crossed. Eleanor knew she should refuse. She knew she should maintain proper distance. But when she looked at Alexander, at the hope in his eyes, at the life returning to his face, she could not bring herself to push him away. "Alexander," she said, testing the name. It felt right on her tongue. He smiled again, and Eleanor felt that crack in her heart widen just a little more. The Duke's household began to notice changes in their master. He smiled more. He took interest in things that had not mattered to him in years. He asked questions about the servants, about their families, about their needs. Morrison, who had served the family for 30 years, commented to the housekeeper that the Duke seemed almost like his old self again. The transformation was connected to Eleanor Hartley. Everyone could see that, but there was nothing improper about it. The Duke never touched her, except for accidental brushes of fingers. He never looked at her with lust. It was something else, something deeper. The servants whispered about it in the kitchen, but not unkindly. They had mourned with their master when the Duchess died. They were glad to see him finding his way back to life. If a servant girl with a gentle smile could accomplish what 3 years of mourning could not, then they were grateful for it. Eleanor's stepmother was not grateful. Mrs. Cromwell seethed with rage when she learned about Eleanor's new position. She had enjoyed crushing her stepdaughter, enjoyed the power it gave her. Now Eleanor was beyond her reach. Living in the main house, wearing decent dresses, eating proper meals. Worse, the Dowager Duchess seemed to approve of the arrangement. Mrs. Cromwell could not complain without looking petty and cruel. So she watched and waited and plotted, her hatred growing with each day that Eleanor smiled and flourished. There would be a reckoning eventually. Mrs. Cromwell would make sure of it. For now she bided her time and sharpened her claws. Eleanor was too happy to notice the danger. For the first time in 5 years, she felt safe. She had a comfortable bed and enough to eat. She had work that was not backbreaking or humiliating. Most of all, she had Alexander. Their evening meetings became the center of her world. She thought about him constantly. She planned what she would wear, what she might say to make him smile, what books she might read that he would enjoy. She told herself it was simple friendship, nothing more. She told herself she was being foolish to think a duke could ever see her as anything but a servant. But late at night, alone in her room, Eleanor let herself dream. She imagined Alexander looking at her with love instead of mere fondness. She imagined him reaching for her hand. She imagined impossible things, and each morning she scolded herself for the dreams and promised she would be more careful. She never was. Alexander was falling in love. He fought against it at first. It was too soon after Maria. It was inappropriate. A duke and a servant. Society would be scandalized. His mother would be furious. He listed all the reasons why it could not happen, why he should send Eleanor away before things went too far. But every evening when she walked into his sitting room, all his careful reasons dissolved like sugar in tea. He needed her. She made him want to live again. When she laughed, he felt joy. When she read to him, her voice soothed something deep in his soul. When she looked at him with those soft brown eyes, he felt seen and known in a way he had never experienced even with Maria. It terrified him. It exhilarated him. He was alive again, fully and completely alive, and it was all because of Eleanor. 1 month after Eleanor had started serving him wine, Alexander made a decision. He could not marry her. Not yet. Society would never accept it, and he needed time to prepare the way. But he could ensure she was protected and provided for. He could make sure Mrs. Cromwell never touched her again. He called for his solicitor and drew up papers making Eleanor his ward. It was an unusual arrangement, but not unheard of. A nobleman taking responsibility for a young woman fallen on hard times. It would give her protection, a small income, and freedom from her stepmother. It was not everything Alexander wanted to give her, but it was a start. He signed the papers and felt something settle in his chest. Eleanor was his now, at least in law. He would keep her safe. No matter what happened, he would keep her safe. That evening, Alexander told Eleanor about the arrangement. She stared at him in shock, unable to speak. "Why?" she finally whispered. "Why would you do this for me?" Alexander set down his wine glass. His hands were shaking. He had not planned to say what came out next, but the words rose up from somewhere deep and could not be stopped. "Because I cannot bear the thought of anything happening to you," he said, his voice rough. "Because you have given me back my life. Because when I breathe in your scent, lavender and warmth, and something that is purely you, I feel drunk on it. I feel drunk on you, Eleanor. I have tried to stop. I cannot." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor sat frozen, her mind reeling. He had noticed her scent. He had noticed her. He felt something for her, something real and powerful. It was everything she had dreamed about and never believed could happen. "Your Grace," she began, then corrected herself. "Alexander, I do not know what to say." Alexander stood and began to pace, agitation clear in every line of his body. "Say nothing. I should not have spoken. I have made you uncomfortable. I am sorry." Eleanor stood as well, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "No," she said firmly. "Do not apologize. I am glad you spoke, because I feel the same." Alexander stopped pacing and turned to stare at her. "You feel the same?" he repeated, as if he could not quite believe it. Eleanor nodded. She was shaking, but she forced herself to be brave. "I have tried not to," she said honestly. "I know it is foolish. I know a duke cannot care for someone like me, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, I am happy. You make me feel safe. You make me feel seen. I think I am falling in love with you." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper on the last words, but Alexander heard them. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. His touch was gentle but firm, warm and real. "Say it again," he demanded, his grey eyes blazing with intensity. "Say you love me." "I love you," Eleanor whispered, and then louder, more sure. "I love you, Alexander." He made a sound low in his throat, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "I love you too," he said fiercely. "I love you, Eleanor Hartley. I do not care what society says. I do not care about anything except keeping you with me. Will you stay? Will you let me court you properly and find a way to make this work?" Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. Happy tears, joyful tears, tears of relief and wonder. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will stay. I will always stay." Alexander lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. It was the first time he had truly kissed any part of her. Eleanor felt the touch burn through her like fire. This was real. This was happening. Against all odds, a duke loved her, and she loved him in return. They talked for hours that night, sitting close together on the sofa, hands intertwined. They made plans. Alexander would need time to prepare society for their union. He would start by introducing Eleanor to his friends as his ward. Slowly, over months, he would elevate her status in everyone's eyes. He would show the world that she was worthy of being a duchess, though in his heart he already knew she was more worthy than any titled lady. Eleanor listened and agreed, though part of her could not quite believe it would work. She had learned long ago that happiness was fragile and easily shattered. But Alexander was so certain, so determined. His confidence began to seep into her. Perhaps it was possible. Perhaps love really could conquer the barriers of class and circumstance. Perhaps she was allowed to be happy after all. When Eleanor finally returned to her room that night, she floated rather than walked. She lay in bed and replayed every word, every touch, every look. Alexander loved her. He had said it out loud. He had made her his ward to protect her. He wanted to marry her. It was a fairy tale come to life. Eleanor knew she should be cautious. She knew there would be obstacles and dangers ahead. But tonight, she let herself simply be happy. She let herself believe in possibilities. She fell asleep with a smile on her face and Alexander's name on her lips. The next few weeks were the happiest of Eleanor's life. She and Alexander spent every possible moment together. During the day, she explored his library and gardens, read books she had never had access to before, and slowly became more confident in her new position. In the evenings, they had their ritual of wine and conversation, but now there was an added intimacy. Alexander would take her hand and hold it while they talked. He would brush a stray curl from her face. Once, when she laughed at something he said, he leaned in and kissed her forehead so gently that she barely felt it. These small touches were precious to Eleanor. She treasured each one, memorized the feel of his skin against hers, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. Alexander was patient with her. He could see that Eleanor was not used to affection, that too much too fast would overwhelm her. So he courted her slowly, earning her trust day by day. He told her stories about his childhood. He taught her to play chess. He walked with her in the gardens and pointed out different flowers, delighted when she knew their names. She had learned about plants from her father, she explained shyly. It was one of the few things her stepmother had not been able to take from her. Alexander loved watching her come alive as she talked about the natural world. He loved how her face lit up when she was excited about something. He loved everything about her, every tiny detail. He had thought he could never love again after Maria. Now he knew that love was not a finite resource. The heart could expand to hold more than one person. Maria would always be part of him, but Eleanor was his future. He wanted that future with a fierce intensity that sometimes scared him. Society began to take notice of the Duke's ward. Alexander introduced Eleanor at a small dinner party, and she was so nervous she could barely eat, but Alexander stayed close to her side, guiding her through conversations, making sure she felt safe. The guests were his closest friends, carefully chosen for their kindness. They accepted Eleanor graciously, seeing how the Duke looked at her, understanding that she was important to him. Rumors started to spread, whispers that the Duke of Ashworth was courting his ward. Some people were scandalized, others found it romantic. The Dowager Duchess was horrified and demanded a meeting with her son. Alexander met with his mother and told her plainly that he intended to marry Eleanor. His mother threatened and pleaded and tried every argument she could think of. Alexander remained unmoved. He was done living his life according to other people's expectations. He was done being empty and alone. He loved Eleanor, and he would marry her. That was final. But there were darker forces at work. Mrs. Cromwell had been watching and planning. She could not allow Eleanor to rise so high. It was unthinkable that her worthless stepdaughter might become a duchess while she remained a paid companion. Mrs. Cromwell began to spread poison. She whispered to anyone who would listen that Eleanor had seduced the Duke, that she had used cunning and manipulation to trap him. She hinted at impropriety, at secret meetings and shameful behavior. She painted Eleanor as a scheming fortune hunter who had taken advantage of a grieving man. Some people dismissed the gossip. Others listened and believed. The whispers grew louder. Mrs. Cromwell smiled her cruel smile and waited for the scandal to explode. Eleanor heard the rumors from one of the housemaids who was trying to be kind. The girl stammered and blushed as she repeated what people were saying. Eleanor felt her happiness crumble. She should have known it was too good to be true. She should have known people would think the worst of her. A servant marrying a duke. It was unnatural in their eyes. She must have done something shameful to achieve it. Eleanor wanted to scream that it was not true, that Alexander had pursued her, that their love was pure and real. But who would believe her? She was nobody. Her stepmother was right after all. She was worthless, and now she would drag Alexander down with her. That evening, Eleanor went to Alexander's sitting room as usual, but everything was different. She could not meet his eyes. She poured his wine with shaking hands and nearly dropped the glass. Alexander saw immediately that something was wrong. "Eleanor, what has happened?" he asked, rising from his chair. Eleanor shook her head, tears threatening to fall. "They are talking about us," she whispered. "They say terrible things. They say I am a fortune hunter, that I have used you shamefully. Alexander, I cannot bear it. I cannot bear to have your name dragged through the mud because of me." Alexander's face darkened with anger. Who has said these things? Eleanor would not tell him. But she did not have to. Alexander knew immediately who was behind it. Mrs. Cromwell had struck her blow. He wanted to rage, to confront the vicious woman and throw her out of his house. But first, he needed to comfort Eleanor. He crossed to her and gently took the wine glass from her trembling hands. He set it aside and then, very carefully, pulled her into his arms. Eleanor resisted for a moment, then collapsed against his chest, sobbing. Alexander held her and let her cry, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring soothing words. "Listen to me," he said, when her tears finally slowed. "I do not care what they say. I do not care what anyone thinks. I know the truth. You are good and kind and brave. You have done nothing wrong. If society cannot see that, then society is blind and foolish. I will not give you up, Eleanor. Not for my mother. Not for gossip. Not for anything. Eleanor pulled back to look at him, her face wet with tears. "But your reputation," she protested. "Your position." Alexander shook his head firmly. "Mean nothing without you. Eleanor, you are my life now. I would rather be disgraced with you than honored without you." His words were so fierce, so certain, that Eleanor almost believed him. But fear had taken root in her heart. "What if it is too much?" she whispered. "What if you come to resent me for what it costs you?" Alexander cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes locked on hers. "I could never resent you," he said. "You have given me back everything that matters. The rest is just noise." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. Eleanor did not pull away. She closed her eyes and felt his lips brush against hers, soft as a butterfly's wing. It was their first real kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When Alexander pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." Eleanor breathed in his scent, soap and wool and something that was purely him. She had fallen drunk on his nearness, just as he had on her lavender scent. They were bound together now, for better or worse. "I love you too," she said. "I am sorry I doubted. I will be brave." Alexander smiled and kissed her once more. "You are already the bravest person I know." But bravery could not stop what was coming. The scandal grew. More people began to whisper. Invitations stopped arriving for the Duke. Old friends began to distance themselves. The Dowager Duchess stopped speaking to her son entirely. Alexander bore it all with stoic grace, but Eleanor could see it hurt him. He was losing his place in society, and it was all because of her. No matter what he said, she felt responsible. Her presence in his life was destroying everything he had built. One particularly brutal evening, after they had been snubbed at the theatre, Eleanor made a terrible decision. She would leave. She would go away somewhere, disappear, and free Alexander from the scandal. It was the only way to save him. She did not let herself think about how much it would hurt. She only knew she loved him too much to watch him suffer because of her. Eleanor packed her few belongings late that night. She wrote a letter to Alexander, though she had to start over 3 times because tears kept smudging the ink. She told him she loved him, that she would always love him, but she could not stay and watch him lose everything. She begged him to forget her and find someone suitable, someone who could be the Duchess he needed. She left the letter on her pillow and slipped out of the house before dawn, her heart breaking with every step. She had some money saved from the small salary Alexander had given her. It would be enough to take a coach somewhere far away. She would find work as a governess or companion. She would survive. She always survived. It did not matter that surviving without Alexander felt like death. It only mattered that he would be free. Alexander found the letter when morning came. He read it once, twice, his face going pale. Then he roared with rage and grief and ran from the room, shouting for Morrison. "Find her," he commanded. "Search everywhere. Bring her back." The household erupted into action. Servants scattered to search the grounds and question the neighbors. Alexander himself rode to the coaching inn, but he was too late. Eleanor had taken the first coach north, and it was long gone. He returned to his house and paced like a caged animal, fury and fear warring in his chest. How dare she leave him? How dare she decide what was best for him? He loved her. He needed her. Without her, he was back in that grey, empty place, and he could not bear it. He would not bear it. Alexander sent riders in every direction with Eleanor's description. He offered a reward for information. He would find her, and when he did, he would make sure she understood that they were in this together, always. Eleanor made it 2 days before she was found. She had taken a room in a small village inn, planning to look for work the next morning. She was exhausted and heartbroken, lying on the hard bed and staring at the ceiling when she heard a commotion downstairs, then heavy footsteps on the stairs. Then her door flew open and Alexander stood there, disheveled and wild-eyed and furious. "How dare you?" he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "How dare you leave me without a word, without letting me have a say?" Eleanor sat up, shocked. "Alexander, what are you doing here? You should not have come. Let me go. It is better this way." Alexander crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her roughly to her feet. "Better?" he shouted. "Better for whom? Not for me. Eleanor, I have been half mad since I found your letter. I cannot live without you. Do you understand? I do not want to." Eleanor was crying now, shaking her head. "You will lose everything because of me. Your friends, your place in society, your mother's love. I cannot let that happen." Alexander's grip on her arms gentlened, though his eyes remained fierce. "None of it matters," he said. "Can you not see that? All the titles and wealth and social position mean nothing if I am alone. You think I did not know what it would cost to love you. I knew. I chose you anyway. I will always choose you, Eleanor. The question is, will you choose me, or will you run away again because you think you know what is best?" His words hit Eleanor like a slap. He was right. She had made the decision for both of them. She had not trusted that his love was strong enough to withstand pressure. She had not estimated him and insulted him at the same time. "I am sorry," Eleanor whispered. "I was afraid. I have never had anything good in my life. I did not know how to hold on to it." Alexander's face softened. He pulled her against his chest and held her tightly. "Then learn," he said into her hair. "Learn to hold on. Learn to believe that you deserve happiness. Learn to trust that I mean what I say when I tell you I love you." Eleanor wrapped her arms around him and held on with all her strength. "I do trust you," she said. "I will not run again. I promise." Alexander pulled back and looked down at her. "Good," he said, "because I am not letting you out of my sight until we are married. In fact, we are going to marry immediately. Tomorrow, if possible. I am done waiting. I am done caring what anyone else thinks. I want you as my wife, Eleanor. Say yes." Eleanor's breath caught. "Tomorrow?" Alexander nodded, his eyes burning with determination. "Tomorrow? Today, if we could manage it. I have a special license. I have had it for weeks. I was trying to be patient and proper, but I am done with that. Marry me, Eleanor. Right now, say you will marry me." Eleanor felt laughter bubble up through her tears. He was impossible and wonderful, and she loved him beyond reason. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Alexander. Tomorrow or today or whenever you want." Alexander's face broke into a smile so bright it took her breath away. He lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, not the gentle kisses of before, but something passionate and claiming. Eleanor kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and commitment into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "You are mine now," he said softly, "and I am yours. Nothing will separate us again." They were married the next morning in a small village church with only Morrison and the innkeeper's wife as witnesses. Eleanor wore the blue dress Alexander had first given her. Alexander wore his finest coat, though it was rumpled from his frantic journey. The vicar stumbled over the ceremony, clearly awed by having a duke in his church. Eleanor barely heard the words. She was too busy looking at Alexander, memorizing his face, hardly believing this was real. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Alexander kissed her so tenderly that Eleanor felt her heart might burst. She was married. She was the Duchess of Ashworth. The servant girl who had been told she was worthless was now one of the most powerful women in England. It was impossible. It was miraculous. It was true. They returned to London together, and Alexander immediately made their marriage public. He took Eleanor to social events, presented her to everyone as his duchess, dared anyone to insult her. Most of society was shocked. Some refused to acknowledge her, but Alexander's closest friends stood by him, and gradually others followed. Alexander's wealth and title gave him power that even scandal could not completely erode. People might whisper, but they could not afford to cut him off entirely. Eleanor faced it all with quiet dignity, her head high, Alexander's arm always supporting her. She would not let him down. She would not prove the gossips right by being anything less than graceful. She would become the duchess Alexander deserved, even if it took years to win society's full acceptance. Mrs. Cromwell tried one last attack, claiming Eleanor had forged documents or tricked the Duke. Alexander shut her down with ruthless efficiency. He had his solicitors bring evidence of Mrs. Cromwell's cruelty to Eleanor, statements from servants who had witnessed the abuse. He threatened to take her to court for battery and theft of Eleanor's inheritance. Mrs. Cromwell, faced with ruin and possible prison, fled London in disgrace. Eleanor felt no triumph at her stepmother's downfall, only relief that the woman could no longer hurt her. She was free, truly and completely free. The past was behind her. The future stretched ahead, bright and full of promise. Alexander's mother eventually came around. She visited the newlyweds 6 months after the wedding, and was surprised to find Eleanor was not the fortune hunter she had imagined. Eleanor was kind and educated, and clearly adored her son. The Dowager Duchess saw how happy Alexander was, how the light had returned to his eyes, how he laughed again. She thought of the empty shell he had been after Maria died, and compared it to the vital, joyful man he was now. Her pride slowly gave way to acceptance. She would never fully embrace Eleanor's low birth, but she could acknowledge that the girl made her son happy. That was worth something. She began to invite them to dinner. She introduced Eleanor to society matrons who could help smooth her entry into the ton. Gradually, the family healed. A year after their marriage, Eleanor stood in the garden of Alexander's country estate and felt the baby move inside her. She was 5 months along, glowing with health and happiness. Alexander came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, his hands resting gently on her swelling belly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. Eleanor leaned back against him, secure in his embrace. "I was thinking about the night you asked me to pour your wine," she said. "I was so afraid of you then." Alexander chuckled. "And I was so desperate to find a reason to keep you near. I told myself it was just your calming presence. I was lying to myself. I knew from the first moment I breathed in your scent that you would change my life." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "You changed mine," she said seriously. "You saved me, Alexander. You gave me back my life." Alexander shook his head. "No, my love. We saved each other. I was dead inside until you came. You brought me back to life. Every day with you is a gift I never thought I would have again." He kissed her softly, then knelt down and pressed his lips to her belly. "And now we have this little one coming. We are going to have a family, Eleanor, a real family, built on love. Can you believe it?" Eleanor stroked his hair, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Sometimes I still cannot believe any of it is real," she admitted. "I keep thinking I will wake up and find myself back in that terrible attic room, hungry and alone." Alexander stood and cupped her face in his hands. "It is real," he said firmly. "This is real. Our love is real, and you will never be alone again. I promise you that." Eleanor believed him. After everything they had been through, all the obstacles they had overcome, She finally believed in her own happiness. She believed in Alexander's love. She believed in their future. The servant girl who had been broken and discarded had become a duchess, a wife, soon to be a mother. She had found a man who looked at her and saw not her past but her worth, who breathed in her scent and called himself drunk on it, who chose her over society, over convention, over everything else. That was real magic. That was real love. As the sun set over the garden, Eleanor and Alexander stood together, wrapped in each other's arms, and watched the sky turn gold and pink. The birds sang in the trees, the flowers perfumed the air, the baby kicked gently, a reminder of the life they were creating together. Eleanor thought back to that first night she had poured wine for the cold, distant Duke. She had been terrified and hopeless then. Now she was cherished and full of hope. The journey from that night to this moment had been painful and difficult, but it had been worth every tear, every fear, every moment of doubt, because it had led her here, to Alexander, to love, to home. She had served him wine every night until he admitted he was drunk on her scent, and in doing so, they had both found salvation.